All right, so for our last problem set, we're going to do the CS50's Don't Panic for in the problem set 3. Okay, so I'm going to have a specific way you work through this one, which will be a little different than what Harvard has, but it's worth looking at the problem set problem itself. Okay, so in this case, you are a pen tester. Now, if you don't know what a pen tester is, it's a penetration tester, and you test vulnerabilities of data systems, right? Not too long ago, you were hired by a small enterprise. You're trying to make a name for yourselves, and they have an SQLite database with a modest traffic of their website that powers it. So we have users for that database, and in this case, that's what you're going to be looking for. Now, by the way, SQLite would not be used in this kind of context, so FYI. So to succeed in this operation, here's your overall goals, right? Alter the password of the website administrator, erase any logs of the above change, and add false data to throw the company off your trail, right? So again, you're penetrating, seeing how well you can penetrate somebody's system, how well their systems are set up to fend that off. Okay, so you're trying to present yourself. You're going to actually want to show that you can do this, and it's you have 5 minutes before they come in actually to do this, but you have more than 5 minutes clearly. But this is just kind of the idea of you don't sometimes when doing this kind of work you have to work quickly, but for our purposes you have to think through it. Okay, so down here I've already given you what you're going to need. So, but I want to scroll down to this part here, right, which is in the specifications. And I'll have you create different files, so we'll talk about that in a minute. But you're going to alter the website, the password of the website administrator, admin, to be oops, right? So in this case, though, and this is an important detail, is that we don't, this is true, and by the way, let me see where I scroll back. Here it is. Keep in mind passwords, and this is true, right? That we don't do that. We don't store them in the clear. In other words, we wouldn't store the password in the clear, meaning somebody could just look at the database. We hash them is one of the ways we do it. And in this case, they provide you, because this can generally be done by code. And if you were actually taking CS50, you'd probably be recommended to have a coding environment where you do this. But for our purposes, all you have to do is create that password, and it gives you a link here to a place to do it. So in this case, whatever the new password needed to be, you generate it, and then that would be your hash. So this is the actual code that represents whatever you're changing it to, and we are provided that change that needs to be done. Okay, so then you're erasing any logs of the above password change, and then you're adding some false data to frame Emily, right? It only appears in the user logs as if the admin password has been changed to Emily's password, right? So you're giving some false data, right? So in this case, let's now turn back to my instruction, because that's the part, and I repeated that instruction, but I did provide the fact that you need to make this MD5 hash password, and there's that website on CS50s, and that these are the same. Okay, now here's the important thing: is you decide the best order to accomplish these tasks. It's not that there's many approaches, right? So there are many ways to accomplish these tasks. Your plan should reflect your reasoning behind your approach. Okay, so just know that that's true. These are the things that have to be accomplished. As a pen tester, you can do them in various ways based on your understanding and your approach to doing it. Now, how do we know your approach is valid, right? Well, if it meets these requirements, if the password has been changed, there's no visible evidence that has been changed, and there's at least one misleading log. Now, in this case, I do say to help you verify, but this is actually going to be a part of the instruction. But here's the deal: is you're going to, right, in your MD file, which I'll talk about next, like the files you need to set up, right, your final state will meet all these goals, right? So, and you'll have also a file at the end. So what I will end up having you do is you move through and attempt to write SQL to accomplish the different tasks. You'll have one file, but once you get to the end, I'm going to have you do this whole thing, all these steps in one SQL file. Okay, So again, there are many valid paths to meet these conditions. What matters most is that the data shows what the data shows, and not the specific path you chose to take to get there. Okay. So, but in order to do this, you have to understand how that user log is written, and that's where the triggers come in. So now you set up your folder. Here are the files you're going to set up. I'll show you my setup in a minute. Setup SQL is to copy, and I provided you the schema. Right, so in this file, if you come down, and this drops it, and the reason you see this is that you're going to end up using, and I'm going to have you call it reset SQL, is you'll run this several times because you'll be changing things, and then you want to reset that database to the beginning. So let me just show you this, and then we'll come back and look at the other files that you're going to need. Let me scroll back up. Here we go. Okay, so in this case, let me move over to my code space. So in my PS3 and my Don't Panic, I went ahead and created my first, right, so my reset file. So here's all that, and then I will want to run. Matter of fact, I was just playing with that, so let me just drop out of there and show you, because I deleted it. And then I'll just do a clear, right? So I'll just go ahead and create that, and what it's going to do first is create the database. We've done this before, right? And then you read the reset SQL. Okay, and what this will do is it'll create that database file, right? And then it will also populate it, because that's what this is, right? This should make sense. Insert into. We've seen some of these. So in addition to the users and the user logs, there's also some items. So it's the idea of simulating the website concept. Okay, so let's come back here, right? So you'll also create a hack.qsql, and this is where you're going to work through each part step by step. Okay, now we'll end up, and I'll talk about this as we move through, but once you have it all done, right, you'll use this file, and this file is set up the same. We've done other files, I'll show here the proof of work that you'll use here. But ultimately, in the end, you're going to copy all the code that you wrote to accomplish all the tasks that are required in one file, reset the database, rerun your file, okay, to actually show that you were able to accomplish all those things in one run of your SQL file. And that's what that will be. And then the README will explain your strategy. So let's actually talk about that README file now. So in that README file that you've created, you'll do a heading, and it should be a heading one called My Plan. And as you explore each requirement, right, and actually in this case, describe your strategy in the order you plan to execute it. So it's kind of like, first, just go look at this database and look at these triggers. So if I was to do that, I'd come over here and I would look at, like, let's go back up to where the actual database itself. So we can see there's triggers in here, right? So we see the tables. We know that we're not dealing with the orders and the items. We're dealing with the users and the user logs, okay? So in that case, what is the part you want to understand is what happens on an update to the user log. So this is the trigger name, right? This is after an update, and this is the work that gets done. This is the content that gets updated. And then after user delete, here's what happens there, right? After insert, here's what happens inside of there. And so the rest is just inserting that content, okay? So now here's the deal, is you first do your first commit here, and you'll end up doing this with your setup, but right, first write your plan out. So if you change your plan, which I would suspect you may, right, add sections or notes, but don't delete your earlier plan. Like if you go, you know what, this was my thinking originally for how I'd accomplish this, right? But in this case, it's the idea of your proof of effort, right? So show your thinking process here. So first set this up, come up with your plan, how you're going to accomplish, right, this requirements for this Don't Panic problem set, right? And then that's what I'm talking about here is to, if you want, and I suspect you will change it. I would expect you to. Having only one plan that you don't update wouldn't make sense to me, because I wanted to see your thinking process. This is the part I just did, and then there is your commit message. Okay, so now we go step by step. Now this is where, because you all may have a different, I suspect there, like I said, there are several paths to getting this done. But first, did you document in your README file under the appropriate part of your plan, right? Document what you did there. And you did it before, but while you're doing this, this is the idea of updating, and then add your query, your SQL, to the hack.sql, and then output to hack.text. So this is where we are using that same file setup we've done before. And then reset the database before starting the next step, right? So first, right, what are you going to do first? And then once you have your SQL that you're going to do, and in that process of playing with your SQL, you may need to reset that database several times, right? That's why this reset is here, because then if it's like, okay, I tried that. I mean, you could write SQL that might reset it for the specific thing that you did, but it's just easier, I think, to drop this or delete this, right? Delete this permanently and then do that again, okay? So that's what I mean here. And all I've done here is given you, maybe here's some possible steps, right? But you can also come up with your own for each step, right? So in your plan, you should have a series of steps that you're going to do. It doesn't mean, right, there could be more. I just gave you 3 examples here. I actually came up, I think I ended up with 5 different ways I thought about this. Okay, now, optionally here, you could take a break if you complete at least 2 steps at this point. But again, this is the idea of the earlier you submit, the more feedback more time you have to both have me give feedback and you to respond to it. So once you've gone through, right, and done, right, you're putting your SQL, writing your SQL in your hack.q.sql file, outputting it to here. Every time you get a step done, you're doing your proof of work with some kind of message that indicates, and the reason I'm not specific here is that your approach may be different, right? Now, when you finally get the whole thing and you're like, you know what, I got this, I know what to do, right? Then your final, right, is once each requirement is tested and working on its own, then combine all that. So leave the hack.sql, but then create your final hack.sql and your proof of work to be, it should be dot, show it final hack.text, right? So what I want to see is a proof of work for the work that you did here, right? Which is your step-by-step development, right? And then once you have it all together, right? And once you have it all together, is structure your file in the same way as your plan, right? Use .print statements to label each section. Again, this should all probably come over already from your hack.sql file. Is that hack q? Then you got it should be hack-q. But then structure your file statements. Yeah, so in other words, you can also put, having statements in that final, I would expect to also see them as you were moving through the steps. And then also run select query statements so that we only see the changes. And this is an important part, right? And actually, did I say this up here? I'm glad we ran into it now because I thought I had. Is that what I ended up doing, and I want you to do, is only show the changes. Like, so as an example, once you run that reset, you have all of this data in there, right? So if I was to do I'm not writing for but I'm just going to give you the example, right? So if I was to do select star from, right? And in this case, let's do user logs, right? Just to show you that. Oh, output, right? Now in this case it's right. So this shows you from the reset. So once you run this the first time, right, is to show it all, then you'll have new entries. And they only show us the new entries that show up. And there's different ways to do this. Like I ended up selecting to show me updates or inserts related to admin, right? So if I come up here and look, here's my admin password. Here's Emily's, who we're going to frame her to have done these changes. So back here, right, is add, where was I at after the break, right? But this also actually should apply to your step-by-step development. It just made it easier for me, but definitely on your end, you want to have only shown, right, in this case, verify the results by showing the user logs specified by just the targeted to the new entries in that log, right? Now, in this case, confirmed, also output that to final hack.txt, right? And then that's your final commit. Okay, so here's the way I will grade it. And I know this can sound a little confusing, but basically what you're doing is breaking all the reviewing the requirements, coming up with a plan, right? So you're going to come up with a plan, understanding first what they are. So I definitely, spend a little time. I'm not having you do it here where you look at all the data, but all the data is also available to you here. That's why I didn't do it, right? But you can, but understand, and you can play around for sure. I would expect, matter of fact, in this case, I'd like to, doing commits where you attempt to do this first change, looking at what that is, right? And that's where your step by step, it's like, okay, how if I do this, and then I do this, and I do this to accomplish all those pieces, and then you bring all those pieces together in one file and you output it and you run one file at the end to show that you broke it into steps and you successfully achieved all the requirements in the end. Okay, I hope this helps give you an idea of what you need to do, but now we're going to do an attendance that will help hopefully clarify it even more. But I wanted to have it as two separate videos.